Just loving this moment. Can we stay here forever? I'm loving this moment. Can we stay here together? If I could stop the time, don't you know that I would? 'Cause I'm just loving this moment. Can we stay here forever? Forever. Forever.
How did we end up here in Nice, France? How did we even end up in France to begin with? The story begins with me. I have always, my entire life, well, for the most part, always wanted to live in France. It was my dream. That dream started when I was about 11 years old, and my parents took my brothers and I to the New York World's Fair. And while we were there, we went into the Paris Pavilion, and there my father bought me a little French beret. And I loved that little French beret, and it opened something up inside of me, and it made me feel that if I put on that beret, I could be French. That beret gave me Frenchness. And I was just 11 years old, and what did I know about being French? So in my mind, I thought that if you were French, you could can. So I managed to get a record of can music, and my next door neighbor and I put on a backyard show for the neighborhood, and here we are, kicking up our heels, doing the can, while the music flowed from upstairs. My bedroom was just above there, and I had my Barbie record player playing can music, blasting can music out there, as the kids in the neighborhood watched my neighbor and I do the can. And as far as I was concerned, that made me French. So that was just the beginning. So over the years, starting when I was that 11-year-old little girl with the beret, I started indulging in all things French, because after all, I wanted to be French. And when I was in 7th grade, I was given an opportunity to study a foreign language. You know it. I needed to learn how to speak French to complete my Frenchness. And so over the years, I studied French for around 8 years and into college. So I decided that I wanted to work for the United Nations, and I wanted to become an interpreter. That was my big plan. You know the old saying, we plan, God laughs. As life would have it, my life did not take me in that direction, and instead I spent over 25 years as a senior human resources manager working for a large company in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And you know, in human resources, it's all about details, 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 details. In that time frame, I always wanted to go to France. That was my big plan. That was the master plan for Anne. Paris. Beautiful Paris. That's where I wanted to live my life someday. I knew I couldn't do it right away. So when I got married, husband number one, he refused to take me to France. He felt that French people didn't like Americans, and there was no way he was going to go to a country where they didn't like Americans. But I had patience, and after we were married for close to 20 years, my husband asked me what I wanted for our 20th wedding anniversary present. And I said, well, I want you to take me to Paris. Finally, please take me to Paris. So he relented, but there was a compromise. He would take me to Paris if I agree to rent a car with him, and we travel around the French countryside. We were both avid gourmet cooks, and we both appreciated fine wines. And his idea was that we travel around the Bordeaux region, the Périgord, and taste wine and enjoy fine foods. And then we drive back up to Paris towards the end of our trip, up the Loire Valley, and all along the way we see the countryside of France. He felt more comfortable with that because I don't know where he was getting his information. There was no internet then. But he believed that the people out in the countryside of France, they were fine with Americans. They didn't hate them as much as Parisians did. Well, during our trip, he learned that Parisians didn't really hate Americans. They treated us quite kindly. However, in that period of time, we relied 100% on my French language skills, which I hadn't spoken in probably 23 years. Nevertheless, in the countryside of France, nobody spoke English, and we traveled from chambre haute to chambre haute, town to town, every night, stopping at a tourist office and booking a room for the night in a tourist office. And that forced me to bring back that French language that I was probably fluent in years before after studying for 8 years. Of course, after that very first trip to France, where as soon as I saw the Eiffel Tower, I could feel in my heart that I was home. You know that when we got back home to the United States, I said to my husband, I really want to move to France someday. It's everything I thought it would be. But he had no interest in moving there for any period of time. So I got creative. Around that time, I was starting to get burned out from all the travel and intense stress in my job, running human resources departments and working 12, 16-hour days. And I came up with this great idea that I would create my own little French world. And I had always had another dream of owning my own little restaurant, because after all, I was an avid gourmet cook. So I came up with the idea of opening my own little restaurant. And I created a salon d'été in the rolling hills of Bucks County, Pennsylvania. I designed a menu based on my own recipes and based on foods that we had tasted out in the countryside of France, mostly out in the countryside at the little salon d'été and also at some of the cafes that we had visited in Paris. Quit my corporate job. Our specialty was a 5-course high tea that I invented in my head, based on little French recipes. So I created this very chic 5-course high tea, and I hired chefs to bring my recipes and my dream to life. My restaurant was called Monet's Garden, and it was fashioned after Monet's home in Giverny. I had French music, old French music, wafting through the air. My husband at that time had perfected the art of baking French baguettes that could compete with any French baguettes sold at any boulangerie here in France. So on the ground floor of the restaurant, we had a bread bakery and a French gourmet shop, and we also sold and used the teas of Marais Frères, based in Paris. I had made a connection with them, so I had created this little French world. I even pretended to be French. When I answered the phone with a phony French accent. And a lot of people bought it because often we had people who would come in and say that they wanted to meet the fine French lady who owned the restaurant. Well, unfortunately, my restaurant met the fate that many restaurants meet, and we closed our doors about a year later. We lost everything that we had put into this restaurant, including our home, including each other. So fast forward, goodbye husband number 1, introducing husband number 2. Well, cut short on that story, although husband number 2 took me to France as many times a year as I wanted to go. Husband number 2 had no more interest in moving to France than husband number 1. So you guessed it, after a long marriage with husband number 2, it was so long, husband number 2. I lived alone with my little Yorkie Morgan, who unfortunately has crossed the Rainbow Bridge, but that dream of going to France never left me. I had this picture hanging on my wall to remind me that this was my dream. And then one day, after more than 50 first dates, a handsome man sent me an email on a dating site and said, "Hey, I'm really interested in you. How about if we meet sometime for a glass of wine and we talk about life?" However, shortly before we met, he sent me one more email. And that email was simply a question. And he said,
"So, if you could live any place else in the world besides here, where would you live?"
And well, you guessed it. What do you think I said? Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Okay, no, I'm just kidding. I said Paris, of course.
So Anne's response about Paris made me more interested because I, again, was also looking ahead to retirement. Where would be the optimum place to be? And Paris and France were on the top of my list also. So, as an architect, I attended Kent State University for my training. And the dean of the School of Architecture was Italian. And he felt that all of the architect students needed to get out of the United States and go to Europe and study in Florence to see the contrast of American life versus life in Europe. Well, for 6 months, I lived in Florence, studied architecture, and enjoyed taking trains everywhere you wanted to go, having the break in the afternoon, walking and seeing a city where everything was pedestrian laid out. And I came back to America after that experience. So after studying in Florence, I had to go back to Kent State University and do 1 more year at the university in Kent State. Then the procedure to become an architect is 3 years of internship with an architect who is already licensed. So I spent those 3 years back in the United States working for an architect who taught me the other parts of being an architect and having a profession and working in an architect's firm. At that point, I ended up staying in America for the rest of my architectural career. And I got licensed in numerous states. And my first base state was Ohio for my registration. But fortunately, I had clients that were all up and down the East Coast and ended up with a license in Florida for some projects we were doing. And working in the United States, I was always missing the European lifestyle. I was missing that, working to enjoy life rather than living to work.
And so we met. And for me, it was love at first sight.
And for me too.
And we fell madly in love. And about 1.5 years later, we got married. And we lived happily ever after.
Except we were in Florida. We weren't where we really wanted to live. And I was still working.
We had done lots of travel to France. So we were gaining lots of knowledge about parts of France, but we went to Paris, I would say, most of the time.
Right.
And then one day, Jeff said,
"You know, in 3 more years, I'm going to be 70 and I'm going to stop working. We should start planning for a retirement to enjoy life."
And then you asked a question that I have never heard from any other husband in my entire life.
And I asked, what if we pack up and sell everything and move to France for our retirement?
Be still my heart. Finally, I find a husband who wants believe it. In fact, I didn't believe him for the longest time. I knew he knew that my dream was always to move to France. And I was worried that he was just saying it because he knew I wanted to move to France. Up to and including the actual day that we were in the airport with all the luggage when he went to return the rental car that we had rented after we sold our cars before we moved here. He left me at the airport with a bunch of suitcases and the dog and said, I'm going to go return the rental car. Even at that very moment, he took so long that I didn't really believe he was going to come. But anyway, he did.
I returned the rental car, came back to the airport, and we got on an airplane and we flew to a new life here in France.
But what did it take to get here?
That is a lot of work, a lot of steps.
So now I will show you what it took for us to get here. So we had made the decision that we would retire to France, but the question was, where? So Jeff managed to get almost 3 weeks vacation off, and we decided to travel around France and decide what town felt right. We had been to Paris many times, and we already knew Paris. We were quite comfortable in Paris, but we felt that Paris would probably be too expensive. And the other thing about Paris was the sun didn't always shine every day, and the climate, and almost every day that we had ever gone to Paris, it drizzled. And
well, the winter time in Paris, it's cloudy and rains a lot. And every once in a while, it actually snows in Paris. And having lived in Florida for as long as we did, we were used to a milder climate and more of a waterfront type living, palm trees, beaches. And Paris, although it's a beautiful city, is not on the water.
And because we were going to be living on only our U.S. Social Security benefits, we had a certain amount of money that we were going to be limited to each month. And because we both came from other marriages, we didn't have huge retirement funds. In fact, until he had decided that he was going to retire, we pretty much didn't have any money in the bank at all. So we had to start at that point putting away as much money as we could put away. But we took this 3-week vacation and we traveled. We started in Paris. We drove to Saint-Emilion. Mostly we went to Saint-Emilion because I had been there many years before and I wanted to show it to Jeff. But it was still a village or town that we were looking at. And then we spent about a week and a half traveling around Provence.
Yep.
We decided Provence just didn't have enough energy for us. We were looking for some place that had life after dark and more than a couple of restaurants in the center of town. So although Provence was lovely, it wasn't really for us. And then we headed a little further south. We spent one night in Saint-Tropez. We admitted Saint-Tropez was way out of our budget. And then we continued down along the Côte d'Azur, and we ended up in Nice. And we spent, I guess, about 4 nights in an Airbnb. And although I had forgotten to ask if there was a lift in the building, we walked up those steps every night.
Right.
And the stairwell was on a timer. So if you didn't get up the steps fast enough, the lights would just go out and you'd be in total darkness, which we did end up having a problem with one night. Neither of us could get up there fast enough. And when the lights went out, Jeff raced up there and he started looking for a button on the wall to turn the lights on. And it turned out he was ringing doorbells, but that's another story.
Yeah.
Anyway, once you got into that Airbnb, which had a terrace that overlooked the port, it took our breath away. And we sat there mesmerized by all of these mega yachts that were coming and going in the port area there. And that was the beginning of us falling in love with Nice. So before we made the final decision that Nice is where we were going to be, we had made a list. And it was basically a checklist of everything that the perfect retirement city would have. Things like, first of all, it had to meet our budget.
Yes.
Nice easily came within our budget.
Yes.
After all, we were coming from a very expensive town in Southwest Florida that technically on our Social Security today, we couldn't afford to live. So it was going to be very easy to find a lot of places that were below that cost of living. So it had to meet our budget. We needed something that was walkable because we didn't want to have a car.
Right.
We wanted to be able to sell our cars, use public transportation the entire time. Unless we needed to go someplace where there just wasn't enough public transportation to get around. In addition, we wanted to be close to a major international airport.
Yep.
So that we could travel. We also wanted to be close to a train station that could take us to all parts of Europe or to a lot of Europe, again, so we could travel. We needed there to be good health care, a good health care system. And as it lucked out for us, because we don't have any other income other than our U.S. Social Security benefits, to be on the France National Health Care System, so far we're not getting any social charges, so it's costing us zero.
Although we do pay VAT tax on everything we buy and every time we spend money here. So we pay a 20% tax into the French system, but we don't have an add-on for the healthcare charges.
Right, we haven't gotten a bill for social charges.
Yeah.
And hopefully we won't. We did have to buy a mutuelle to cover expenses that the healthcare system doesn't cover. But anyway, we were looking for a city or a country that offered good or equal, if not better, healthcare than we were getting in the United States. And Nice has tons of doctors. We have never had any kind of problems here. So that checked off that box. We needed to be near a hospital. We also, because Jeff does not speak as much French as I do, we wanted to be a place, initially at least, with a large expat population. It is true that a lot of people speak French here in Nice, and that's primarily in the tourist areas. But once you live here in Nice, it is important to speak the language because not everybody in the service trades and customer service speaks English.
Luckily, when Ann and I go to a restaurant and Ann orders, they bring French menus to the table. When I speak, they come over and switch it out and give me an English menu. But she's done very well picking up French and speaks very clearly.
Although we aren't real active in that expat community, most of our friends are in fact expats. And so that does make it easier for Jeff. And hopefully, as the years go on, we'll make lots of French friends and be able to integrate more into the French community.
Yes.
But these were things that were very important to us in finding the perfect place to move to. And of course, the climate. We were coming from Naples, Florida, where, it's summertime for the most part, most of the year. Here, it does get cold. For me, it gets very cold compared to Florida weather. In the 40s, in the wintertime, to me, is very cold. But I guess I still have my Florida skin. But anyway, Nice ticked all of those boxes for us. So when it came time to deciding where to move, Nice was an easy yes. So let's talk about that YouTube channel. How did we get on this YouTube channel thing? Well, the YouTube channel actually had nothing to do with our moving to France. When Jeff and I met, my mother was in a nursing home and she was suffering from Alzheimer's disease. And she didn't live a whole lot longer, but for quite a few years, I had watched my mother deteriorate from the ravages of this terrible disease. And when she passed away from Alzheimer's, it was really upsetting, and I was so devastated, not just at the loss of my mother, but I was filled with fear that this is the way I could die as well. And I spoke with my doctor the next time I saw him, and I told him that I was scared that I could die that way, and I didn't want to die that way. And he said to me, keep your mind busy. Just keep your mind busy. He said the chances of you getting Alzheimer's just because your mother had it are very slim. He said, do puzzles, learn another language, teach yourself something hard to do, some skill that uses that part of your brain that keeps your mind functioning. And I said to him that I had been watching YouTube channels. I had recently discovered YouTube, and I saw all these women with YouTube channels, and they were just talking about makeup they liked and decorating and life. And I said, I'm thinking about doing a YouTube channel, not necessarily because I feel like shooting videos on makeup reviews or restaurant reviews, but because the editing part is something that I would really be challenged by, something I'd really be interested in doing. And he said, do it. That would be perfect. So I created a YouTube channel. In fact, when I said to Jeff, I'm thinking about creating a YouTube channel, he looked at me like, a YouTube channel?
What are you going to talk about?
And I said, I have no idea. I'm going to do it, and we'll see what happens. And so I started creating videos about every topic that I could think of, nothing at all to do with France, because at that point, France was definitely not even something that was on the horizon. And I started doing these videos on topics that I thought were relatable to women. And so I would do makeup reviews, and they would get some views. But one of the videos that I did, which to this very day, our very, very top video in the entire history of our channel, is one on intimacy and sex after 65.
Wow.
We have had, 250,000 views or something like that. It's this unbelievable amount. And every month when I look at the statistics for our YouTube channel, that video is always the #1 video to this very day.
Yeah.
So that's how the YouTube channel was born. Now, when we decided that we were going to retire to France, I had to do an awful lot of research. It wasn't just enough to decide that we're going to move there. It's like, okay, how do you get there? How do we get a visa?
And you started doing this planning years in advance of the actual move.
Right. So we decided 3 years before we actually moved that we were going to move to France, and it was going to be Nice. So then I started doing all of the research. And I started thinking, as I'm doing the research, I can either write this all down in a notebook, and then when it comes time to apply for the visa application and figure out how to exchange our driver's license and how to get health care and how to get little Bella to France, I can look in the book, or I can use this for my YouTube channel. And so I started creating videos, basically talking to me. I know you, a lot of you who watch our channel, you think I did these videos for you. I actually did them for me because I knew that I was the one who was going to have to do this for both of us.
But sharing all of the step-by-step is very helpful for everybody else.
Yes, and because of my human resources background, where details were important, I have tried to be very, very detailed in those videos. So I created those videos, and when it came time to do each of those steps, just like a lot of you, I turned the video on our television, I got my laptop, and I followed my own video to apply for our visas, to apply for the healthcare system, to exchange our driver's licenses here in France. Jeff, his job was earning the money so that we could retire to Nice.
So I ended up staying at my job and working until a month before we actually moved. So I was not any or very little help, and Anne pretty much organized all the things that we needed to do to get to France.
Exactly. So this is the bin of red and pink and purple shoes. And here's more with the shoes. I just grabbed another bin out of my closet. And this one's all gold and silver shoes. So, and there's my pile. Those are shoes. At the moment, they're shoes I'm keeping. These are just some of the videos that I created showing you how to do every piece and part of applying, making the applications for all sorts of things to get to France. And then once we're here, we shared other tips on how to do other things to make your life more comfortable. In some of our videos, we answered those questions you didn't know you were going to have until you got here. In the dining room. So this will be stored under the guest room bed. We bought this whole wall of cabinets. Actually, it came from IKEA. Now I can sort of spread out when I'm doing food preparation. And of course, we got a new coffee machine. We also added a new oven to our apartment, and we also added all of the under-counter lighting and the black rack along the wall. So Jeff also added the under-counter light here and this black rack. And here we have the finished product. Look how pretty. Great job, Jeff. And then we added a couple of inexpensive mats for the floor to pick up the gold. And now I think our kitchen is complete. And we bought an ice maker. I know, us Americans and our ice cubes. So now we come into our living room. Of course, we have to start with Bella's little toy basket. Now, the couch that you see in front of you, all three sections come out, they pull out. This one stays fixed in a chaise position. And this is another piece that came with the apartment. I had nothing else to put my wine glasses in, and it doesn't look too terrible here in the living room. So we have incorporated it into our decor. Now, one thing about this table, we bought this, Jeff was going to use this as a desk. And the table was actually, until we got our couch, we thought that it would go behind the couch. But the whole thing opens up and we can pull it out. And if we have a lot of company, the whole thing opens to make a giant, well, giant for this apartment, a giant dining table. This is another piece that came with the apartment, as did the mirror. And the piece was actually in the bedroom, the master bedroom. So here is our little toilet room. We didn't think it should just be a boring toilet and nothing else. So we've decorated it with old postcards from Paris, an old map of Paris. Because after all, Paris is always in our hearts. And here is our bathroom. Jeff has added shelves right here for me, mostly for me. And we have with lots of storage. This is one of the antique pieces that came with the apartment. And so we've put it in the hallway here, and I actually used the bottom part of the cabinet for extra sheets. And if you look at this, this looks like maybe it was a built-in unit. So I bought the greenery and hung it so it's not so visible. We've made some changes in our guest room. We put up, this is a wall unit, and it goes from here all the way over to here. So when you're all done working for the day, you fold your computer up, close the desk, slide your laptop right in that nice little pocket, and then you have to operate this from only the back sides there because it's on a certain weight. And then it comes down. And there we have our fully made bed. Just a few little adjustments. You need to tuck that little blanket down, and then it has legs that come down on the sides here. And there's one at this end. And there's another at that end. And voila! And that gives us all this floor space here in the guest room. And then, now, believe it or not, behind these cabinets, all kinds of storage. Jeff put shelving up there, and we've moved things around a little bit. And our dryer's right here now. And he also bought this unit in IKEA, actually. And I love this unit. I only wish our master bedroom had space in it for me to have one like this. This drawer comes out, and he can line up all of his slacks on the drawer. And this drawer comes out, and he can put socks, all kinds of stuff here. So this is fabulous for Jeff. for his clothing. And for those of you that are wondering why Jeff's got his stuff in here, he was nice enough to give me the entire master bedroom closet, which isn't such a big deal technically because it's not huge. And this is our thriving terrace garden. Of course, we have our herbs over here, which is just perfect. These are the herbs I use most often, hoping our lavender will bloom soon. And jasmine is already in bloom, and it smells heavenly. And we've got a gorgeous fuchsia plant here. So those videos, they got us to France, just like they will get a lot of you to France, or have already gotten, I venture to say, hundreds if not thousands of people to France. We're very happy that we have been able to help so many people, and we hope to continue to help lots more people. And so now our YouTube channel just shares our life, our day-to-day life. If we travel, we try to share some videos from our travel. We try not to make the YouTube video our entire life because after all, we are retired. Although for two retired people, we are really, really busy, busier than we ever thought we would be.
But that's one of the reasons we came to Nice, was because it's a hub when you can go all these different places.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's how my love of France, Jeff's love of France, our decision to come to Nice happened, and that's how the YouTube channel started. So we thank you so much for sticking with us, and for those of you that follow our channel or subscribers to our channel, we love you. Thank you. Bye for now.
Just loving this moment. Can we stay here forever? I'm loving this moment. Can we stay here together? If I could stop the time, don't you know that? I could stop the time, don't you know that I would? 'Cause I'm just loving